Shabbat Shalom. 60 years ago this spring, an event unfolded that gave rise to what is arguably the most iconic image of the American Jewish experience, a photograph of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching arm in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, Alabama. Heschel, his long white beard and wild halo of hair, unmistakable, walks beside King along with other civil rights leaders, including a nun and John Lewis, whose skull had been fractured by Alabama state troopers just weeks earlier on Bloody Sunday, March 7th, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. As historian Julian Zelizer notes, the image captures not only the friendship between Heschel and King, but also the enduring connection between religion and politics, and for many American Jews, it encapsulates the American Jewish experience itself. In more rabbis' offices, in more synagogues and Jewish day schools than I can count, I've seen that photograph hanging proudly. So many of us have heard sermons referencing Heschel's refrain about marching that day, "I felt my legs were praying." Iconic as a photograph is, celebrated as a friendship between Heschel and King may be, I recall truly a true story, a child asking whether non-Jews observe MLK Day too. What you may not know is that in the moment itself, Heschel's engagement with civil rights was met with discomfort, resistance, and outright criticism. I'm referring not just to the intimidating police who had orchestrated the brutality a few weeks earlier, or the onlookers brandishing Confederate flags or chanting racist and anti-Semitic taunts, but the Jewish community itself. The Jews who said that Jews should only be concerned about other Jews, that we would be better not to get involved in the civil rights movement. The memory of the Holocaust was still raw. The safety of our brothers and sisters in Israel was far from assured. This is not our problem. In the years to come, Heschel would align publicly with the anti-war movement, the founder of the interfaith clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. President Johnson, as Zelizer notes, known to be quite vindictive against his political opponents, was perceived to be a strong ally of Israel. Many Jewish leaders were averse to alienating him or his administration, fearing public criticism of the war could hurt Israel and hurt American Jews. Heschel's deep and credentialed love for the people and state of Israel was beyond reproach. "I am," he wrote, "a brand plucked from the fire in which my people was burned to death," he reflected. In the wake of the '67 war, he published a book, Israel, an Echo of Eternity, a theological defense of Zionism and the spiritual significance of the return of the Jewish people to the land. But despite his passionate commitment to Jewish peoplehood, many in the Jewish community, including rabbinic colleagues, were uneasy with his associations. His alliances with left-leaning Christian and secular activists made many uncomfortable. The Rabbinical Assembly, the Union of Conservative Rabbis, publicly criticized Heschel and like-minded rabbis for what it called poor judgment in their activism. At the seminary, JTS, Heschel was marginalized. A critical letter published in the New York Times bore the signatures of his rabbinic colleagues. His courses were listed under education rather than theology. He was never assigned a teaching assistant, a petty detail perhaps, but one of the many small slights that signaled lack of institutional support. Today, Heschel's stature is accepted by American Jews as an article of faith, his books on our shelves, his picture on our walls. But in his day, he was often isolated and alone. In his loneliness, Heschel drew strength from within, the still small voice of conscience that anchored him and provided him with a moral clarity to navigate the turbulent terrain of his time. It's 60 years later. America has changed, as have American Jewry, Israel, and the relationship between them. But the questions we face, the tensions with which we wrestle, the tightrope we walk, ours is not the first generation to balance so much. Surrounded by ongoing external threats, Israel seeks to secure its present and its future. And we as American Jews understand ourselves as stakeholders in that effort. American Jews bear the brunt of anti-Semitism coming from both sides of the political spectrum. It is not self-evident where, if anywhere, our natural political home is. We journey through a fraught political landscape populated by mercurial, populist, and transactional leaders. Who are our enemies? We more or less know. Who are our friends? We hotly debate. Our trauma is fresh and ongoing. Always, and especially as Passover approaches, we recall that we were once strangers in a strange land. Be it Egypt, Eastern Europe, or Ethiopia, our own experience, as Heschel taught, prompts both concern for our Jewish selves and also empathy for those who are marginalized and downtrodden. In light of the threats faced by our people, how can we not prioritize the well-being of Jews above all else? In light of the threats faced by our people, how can we not prioritize concern for the other? And despite living in a time when we do not lack for enemies from without the Jewish community, we seem to have no problem naming enemies within. I think of Heschel's time. I think of Heschel himself. An Israel in conflict with its enemies, an America rife with division, and an American Jewry divided within, fractured by internal debates over what is and isn't in the best interest of the Jews. This morning, I'm going to leave aside Israel's internal debates, how Israel should best prosecute this war against Hamas, secure the release of the hostages, and plan for the day after. We covered much of that in last night's conversation with Ambassador Oren, which will be online shortly. Let's focus today on America and American Jewry. We are all well aware of the intolerable situation on college campuses. As a parent of 4 college-age students, I know about it directly and have spoken of its threat repeatedly. Encampments, mass protesters, intimidation on the campus diag, online, in the library, in the classroom, divestment campaigns, the list goes on, and we are all horrified by what happened at McGill just the other night. I, for one, will welcome the return of anti-masking laws, to name but one of many overdue and much-needed legislative measures. What I also know is that there is a cascade of consequences to the present overreach. This week, I received a phone call from a parent whose child was admitted to college on the promise of a scholarship that had been redirected due to now budget cuts. Did I know of alternative sources of funding? The parent wanted to know. This week, I spoke to a young woman on the hunt of a post-college research job, positions that have dried up due to funding cuts. I have a D.C. rabbinic colleague whose community is hemorrhaging his now unemployed congregants. I have another colleague who works at HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, 40% of its staff furloughed due to cuts. I could take a deep dive into little things like civil liberties, due process, the importance of cancer research, and for that matter, the dangers of making the Jewish community a political pawn. But I don't need to. Our community is already feeling the implications in real time. It's impacting members of our own community and our communal institutions. And despite the surfeit of external challenges we face, as in days of old, we seem to have no trouble turning our aim onto our own. This past week, at a certain college campus with which I have deep ties and abiding loyalty, at which the DEI program is currently being dismantled, that is no longer in the tournament, the Hillel students decided to release an anodyne statement supporting those facing defunding and an affirmation of the value of diversity and tikkun olam. A Jewish parent group responded with the insistent demand that the students recant, publish a full retraction, and that a public apology be issued from the Hillel. A similar dynamic happening on campus after campus and now at the top level of Hillel International. The parents' response is problematic, not just because they are directing their ire at the very institution devoted to the welfare of the Jewish student body, and publicly so, not just in their failure to recognize that just about the dumbest thing one can say to a Jewish 20-year-old is that expressions of moral conscience exist beyond the bounds of Jewish communal discourse, a response that will result in them walking away from Hillel and Judaism altogether, but also for its failure to recognize that the complexity of the hour not only allows for, but insists upon a judicious and textured response. I'm reminded of a comment Brett Stevens made from this pulpit earlier in this week. George Will's maxim, the four most important words in politics are up to a point. Problematic as DEI has been for Jewish students, critical as it is to prioritize the welfare of Jewish students and Jewish identity over all else, the values of diversity, inclusion, and dialogue are values that are not only okay to champion, not only important to support, but dare I say, Jewish to do so. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes the best reaction is no reaction at all, to keep calm and carry on. At all times, common sense dictates that one Jew not attack, stifle, or squash an impressionable Jewish soul, and certainly not do so publicly. Nuance is hard. Holding and expressing two truths is hard. But hard isn't bad. Hard is just hard. We should embrace nuance and model the ability to hold multiple truths for its own sake and for the sake of encouraging others to do the same. In the midst of the whirlwind, as we are buffeted by forces beyond us, often within us, we need, as Heschel did in his time, to attune ourselves to the still, small voice within, the voice of our moral conscience. We've entered, by many accounts, a post-liberal world order where policies and alliances are being shaped by self-interest, power, and instrumentality, not by morality. Our allies are allies for what they provide us, not for the values we share. It is hard in such a world to stay true to that voice of conscience within, to stand for what is right, not because it's popular or useful, but because it is right. Our Torah reading and this third book of the Bible famously begins with the Hebrew word vayikra, to call out a word whose final letter, the aleph, is written much smaller in the Torah scroll than all other letters. And while rabbinic explanations abound for this orthographic curiosity, for me, the most simple and compelling reason is a reminder that the call from God and to God often comes from the small aleph of conscience embedded in our souls. No different than, as the rabbis explained, the divine voice of Mount Sinai began with the aleph of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, so too this aleph of the wilderness sojourn. As Elijah himself would discover in a later generation, upon his return to that very mountain of God, God's voice is not in the wind, not in the fury, not in the fire. God's voice, the voice of conscience, is found in the kol d'mama daka, the still small voice within. There is a silence that signals indifference to evil. There is a silence that indicates betrayal. Nobody knew that better than Heschel and his generation. But there's also the steady, silent sound of one's own conscience, a quiet that anchored Heschel in his day and that steadies us as we journey through this time of tumult. As Heschel wrote in a work published posthumously, the human predicament is a state of constant and irresolvable tension between mighty opposites. Piety and prudence, truth and self-interest are irreconcilable. tension and conflict can no more be eliminated from thought than from life. Passover is but days away, our people's annual festival of freedom. Freedom is defined in so many ways: personal, national, physical, spiritual. This year, we're all going to have the hostages on our mind. As we do each year, we will rise up in our Seder from our seats and welcome Elijah into our home and hearts. Perhaps this year, it's not just Elijah, but the still small voice he represents, of which we are in most need, to pass through the narrow straits of our time, to walk this precipice, following our conscience and guided by our core Jewish values, with a shared prayer that we all cross over into freedom together. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.